Renee Caldwell had been sitting in that lobby for nearly 2 hours, her name forgotten, her presence ignored, until the elevator doors opened and the entire building seemed to shift. Naomi Greer's voice rang out clear and unmistakable. "Renee Caldwell. I didn't know you were visiting today." In that instant, every head turned, and the woman they had treated like background furniture became the center of the room. If Renee Caldwell had known how that morning was going to unfold, she might have swapped her kitten heels for the low black pumps, the ones she always packed for days that required waiting. But that morning wasn't supposed to be one of those days. That morning was supposed to mark the beginning of a new chapter. She had her blazer pressed, her notes memorized, and her decades of expertise tucked neatly inside a leather-bound portfolio she had carried from Atlanta to Denver. Everything about her, from her posture to the tone in her voice, said she belonged. But inside the lobby of the Meridian Apex Group's glass-paneled headquarters, belonging didn't seem to matter much. Renee had arrived 15 minutes early, always early. Early is respectful. Late is forgettable, her grandmother used to say. And so she walked through those shiny glass doors at 9:45 a.m. for a 10 o'clock meeting with Brandon Keller, the regional director, ready for what she hoped would be a transformative opportunity. She approached the front desk with a calm smile, nodded politely to the young receptionist who was typing away with her acrylic nails and sipping an iced coffee far too quickly for a Monday morning. "Hi, good morning. I'm Renee Caldwell. I have a 10 o'clock with Brandon Keller," she said, her voice warm, professional. The receptionist gave her a quick glance, tapped at the keyboard with 2 fingers, then picked up the phone. "One moment," she murmured. A whisper followed, and then a tight-lipped smile. "He'll be with you shortly. Please have a seat." Renee thanked her, turning toward the seating area flanked by towering windows that flooded the lobby in golden Colorado light. She took a seat by the corner, where she could see both the elevator bank and the front desk, her preferred spot for interviews, close enough to observe, far enough not to be overheard. 10 minutes passed. No call. She wasn't worried. Executives run late. She reviewed her notes one more time, flipping through bullet points she already knew by heart. 20 minutes. Still nothing. She shifted in her seat, uncrossed and recrossed her legs, checked her phone, not for emails, but to look busy. Professional. Occupied. At 10:35, Renee stood and returned to the desk. "Hi again. Just wanted to confirm Mr. Keller is still available for our meeting?" The receptionist barely looked up. "He's finishing a call." "Shouldn't be long," she replied, her voice clipped, her eyes already drifting back to the screen. Renee returned to her seat. This time, she felt it. That unmistakable weight, not of impatience, but of being disregarded. The weight of having to be twice as prepared, twice as polite, twice as qualified, just to be forgotten twice as fast. She watched as 2 young white men strolled in, laughing about tea times and bourbon tastings. They didn't check in. They were greeted immediately, given coffee, ushered into an inner hallway with a level of ease Renee could only dream of. She looked down at her portfolio and smoothed its leather cover with one hand, silently willing herself to keep calm. By 11 a.m., the polite warmth had faded from her expression. Her back ached from sitting upright in a chair clearly designed more for aesthetics than comfort. Her heel tapped softly against the polished floor, a sound she immediately stifled, worried it might be seen as disruptive. She shifted, sat straighter, and glanced around the lobby. The receptionist hadn't looked her way once. And no one else had either. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being erased. A janitor walked past, an older man with gray curls under a faded cap. Their eyes met briefly. He gave her a quiet nod, no smile, no words, just that gentle look of recognition. That tiny, powerful thing people share when they've both had to wait too long for the world to notice them. Renee offered the slightest smile, then looked down again. She didn't want to seem idle. Or worse, out of place. 11:15, an hour and 15 minutes. Renee closed her portfolio again. She had stopped reviewing it 20 minutes ago. There was nothing left to memorize. She stood once more and approached the desk. The receptionist blinked, startled, as if she'd forgotten Renee was still there. "I'm sorry to ask again," Renee said, her voice even, deliberate, "but it's been over an hour. Should I reschedule?" The receptionist blinked twice, tapping her acrylics against the desk like it might summon a better answer. "Mr. Keller is just, still in a meeting. He should be out soon." The same line. The same smile. The same nothing. Renee nodded once, her throat tightening with a mixture of frustration and something far heavier, shame. But it wasn't hers. It was what the moment was trying to place on her. The kind of shame that creeps in uninvited, whispering lies about your worth, about whether you belong. She sat back down. This time, she didn't cross her legs. This time, she folded her hands tightly in her lap and stared straight ahead. She was exhausted. Not just from the weight, but from the act. From having to wear professionalism like armor. From having to sit still in a space designed to make people like her feel disposable. Invisible. Her phone read 11:27. She blinked hard. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Baby, you don't let nobody tell you your worth by how they treat you. They don't know how far you came to sit in that chair." Renee swallowed hard. And then the energy shifted. It started with the click of heels. Not hers. Someone else's. Then the soft murmur of lowered voices. The front doors opened, and 5 people walked in, 3 men, 2 women. They weren't guests. They were leaders. You could feel it in the way the air changed. The receptionist stood up straighter. Conversations dropped a notch. Someone behind Renee actually put their phone away. And then she saw them, Naomi Greer and Terrell Vance. Senior VP and Global CEO, respectively. Naomi's signature plum blouse, Terrell's navy suit with the pocket square. Renee's breath caught. They were power. They were change. And they were walking toward her. Naomi looked directly at her. "Renee Caldwell," she beamed. "I didn't know you were stopping by today." Heads turned. The receptionist froze. Terrell looked over, smiling. "Renee, it's good to see you again. Your keynote at the National Strategy Summit? Outstanding." In that moment, every inch of the lobby saw her. And none of them could unsee it. Behind the front desk, Brandon Keller, flushed, fidgeting, appeared from a side hallway, stammering something about meetings running long, apologizing profusely. But no one was listening. Naomi extended her hand. "If you're free, we'd love to hear your thoughts on a few initiatives we're building out. Come upstairs with us?" Renee stood, her movements smooth, practiced. "I'd be honored," she said, slipping her portfolio under her arm. She didn't glance at Brandon. She didn't need to. As she walked beside Naomi and Terrell toward the elevators, the heat of every unseen minute still burned behind her, but so did something else. A quiet, certain fire. The waiting was over. The elevator doors hadn't even closed behind them, and already the air felt different. The quiet tension that had pressed against Renee Caldwell's chest all morning had started to lift, replaced with something sharper, clarity. As she stepped into the executive conference corridor beside Naomi Greer and Terrell Vance, she felt the subtle shift in posture from the people around them, the respectful nods, the hushed conversations. Up here, no one looked past her. No one ignored her presence. And yet, the memory of that lobby still clung to her, 2 hours of being seen and unseen all at once, like furniture in the wrong room. But now, every eye saw her, because Naomi Greer had seen her first. Because Terrell Vance had remembered her keynote. Because the power in the room had decided she mattered. As they walked past the glass offices lining the hallway, Brandon Keller scrambled behind them, his shoes tapping nervously on the polished floor. He looked smaller now. The easy arrogance from earlier had vanished, replaced by a flustered, almost pitiful urgency. "Naomi, Terrell, so sorry again for the delay," Brandon called out, trying to catch up, his tone just a little too loud, a little too bright. Naomi didn't slow down. We'll debrief later, she said crisply over her shoulder. Terrell didn't acknowledge him at all. Renee didn't need to look back to know Brandon was floundering. He had made a decision that morning, conscious or not, to treat her like an afterthought. And now the cost of that decision was walking away from him in tailored suits. They entered the executive conference room, a sleek, sunlit space framed by Denver's skyline and accented with clean white lines and brushed steel. Renee took a seat at the long table as Naomi gestured for her to join them at the head. We've been wanting to expand the scope of the upcoming leadership initiative, Naomi said, pulling a slim binder from her briefcase and sliding it across the table. After your talk at the National Summit, you were the first person who came to mind. Terrell nodded. You laid out a vision in that room that this company needs. And frankly, some of us have been looking for a reason to bypass the usual chain of recommendations. Renee opened the binder, scanning the pages: preliminary budgets, innovation task force timelines, internal audits. It wasn't a pitch. It was an invitation. She felt it in her chest before she could find the words for it. This wasn't just a correction of a wrong, it was a door flung wide open. I'm honored, she said, keeping her voice steady, her face calm. Truly. And I do have some immediate ideas about how this initiative can be aligned more directly with cross-functional efficiency, especially if you're aiming for an inclusive leadership pipeline. Terrell's eyebrows lifted slightly. Naomi leaned forward. Tell us everything. And so she did. For the next 40 minutes, Renee spoke with the kind of command that only comes from years of being forced to work harder, think faster, stay sharper. She mapped out a strategy that cut through layers of corporate red tape, restructured team alignment, and integrated mentorship for overlooked internal talent. The room was silent, but not the way the lobby had been. This silence listened. When she paused, Naomi smiled. Exactly the lens we need. You're not just on the task force, Renee. We want you leading it. Across the glass wall, through the subtle tinting, Renee spotted Brandon Keller hovering just outside his office, watching. Pretending to review papers he hadn't touched since morning. She met his gaze briefly, calmly. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply turned back to the table and continued. The meeting stretched just past an hour. By the end, Naomi had made it clear, the team would build the next phase of the company's leadership strategy around Renee's framework. She was no longer a name waiting in the lobby. She was now the blueprint. As they wrapped up, Terrell stood and offered his hand. Think it over, he said. But I'd personally be thrilled to see you step into this role. Renee stood, shook his hand firmly, and nodded. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll give it thoughtful consideration. Naomi walked her out. As they reached the elevator, she paused. By the way, she said, her voice lower now, if anything like what happened this morning ever happens again, don't wait in silence. Come directly to me. No intermediaries. Renee's lips parted in a small, grateful smile. Thank you. That means more than you know. When the elevator doors opened, Naomi gave her one last nod before turning back. As Renee descended to the lobby, her heart beat steadily. She wasn't just coming down from the 23rd floor. She was coming back from invisibility. The same receptionist from earlier barely met her eyes as she exited, cheeks flushed with sudden awareness. The lobby was busier now, but no one could pretend not to see her. Not anymore. Outside, the Colorado air was crisp, the sun gleaming off the glass facade behind her. Renee paused at the sidewalk, her reflection caught in the building's surface. She looked the same. But everything had changed. What the people in that lobby hadn't known, what Brandon Keller had failed to understand, was that Renee Caldwell had already earned her place long before she walked through those doors. They had just been too blind to see it. And now? Now they were playing catch-up. As she walked toward her car, Renee didn't rush. Her steps were measured. Intentional. She had no interest in revenge. She wasn't seeking applause. She was simply walking in the fullness of who she had always been. The woman they'd underestimated. The woman they'd left waiting. The woman who now held the keys to the table they thought she couldn't reach. And this was only the beginning. Renee Caldwell didn't go home right away after that meeting. She drove out to a quiet overlook above the city, a place she'd found during her first week in Denver, where the skyline rolled out beneath her like a blueprint. She sat there for a while in silence, watching the sun dip behind the Rockies. It was the kind of stillness she needed to recalibrate, not because she was overwhelmed, but because something inside her had finally clicked into place. For weeks she'd questioned if this move, this company, this meeting was the right next step. But after walking out of that conference room with Naomi Greer and Terrell Vance, after being seen, not evaluated, not tolerated, but truly seen, she knew her answer. The next morning, Renee emailed Naomi her acceptance. She was ready to lead the executive task force, ready to help shape a future that didn't leave qualified people sitting in lobbies and visible to the very companies they were meant to help lead. The official offer letter came 2 days later, accompanied by a call from Terrell himself. "You've got my full support," he said. "This is more than a project. This is a shift." By Friday, her new role was announced across the company intranet, lead advisor of strategic innovation and inclusive leadership. The congratulatory emails rolled in from people she hadn't even met yet. People in marketing, logistics, IT, all thanking her for stepping into a role they hoped would change things for the better. But not everyone was celebrating. In quieter corners of the building, the whispers had begun. Brandon Keller's name was at the center of them. His failure to recognize Renee's qualifications, his repeated brushing off of meetings with women of color, the way his team had built a reputation for subtle but consistent exclusion, it was all being re-examined under a new lens. Human resources, apparently, had already been collecting internal complaints, none loud enough alone to trigger action, but together, they painted a clear picture. Renee didn't need to be involved in that part. She hadn't filed a report. She didn't need to. The truth had already made its way into the right hands. And by the following week, Brandon's nameplate was quietly removed from his office door. No big announcement. No farewell party. Just an empty office and a locked file drawer. Word spread fast, and though no one said it directly to her face, the way people looked at Renee changed. Not with fear. Not with pity. With respect. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. She had simply shown up, stayed ready, and when the moment came, she moved. Her first day leading the task force was met with anticipation. Department heads, regional directors, even junior analysts filled the long conference table. The energy in the room was charged, some curious, some skeptical, most hopeful. Renee stood at the head of the table in a slate gray dress and a silk blouse. No notes in her hands. She didn't need them. The lights dimmed. Her first slide lit up the screen with one bold sentence: "Good ideas don't care where they come from. Neither should we." A few people shifted in their chairs. She paused, letting the words settle before she spoke. "I'm not here to fix optics. I'm here to change the infrastructure of how we value leadership." She clicked to the next slide, a chart of promotion rates broken down by demographics. The numbers spoke louder than any anecdote. This isn't just about representation. It's about recognition. Talent isn't rare. Opportunity is. From there, the room leaned in. She mapped out a framework to fast-track underrepresented talent, pairing them with senior mentors, opening visibility pipelines, and instituting accountability audits for every division head. Her voice was measured, clear, unapologetic. She didn't need to perform. She just needed to be heard. And she was. When the presentation ended, there was silence for a beat, then applause, real applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Genuine. People asked thoughtful questions. Others took notes furiously. Even those who had entered with guarded skepticism found themselves nodding along. By the end of the session, several department leads approached her with follow-ups, eager to collaborate. One young woman from the marketing division caught her after the room cleared. "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened in the lobby last week," she said quietly. "I didn't know what to do. But watching you walk into this, just thank you. For staying. For showing us how to do it with grace." Renee smiled, her throat tightening for just a moment. "We all have our lobby moments," she said. "But they don't define us. What we do after does." Over the next few weeks, Renee's presence began reshaping the culture inside Meridian Apex. Department meetings ran differently. Hiring panels started asking better questions. Internal promotions were scrutinized more closely for fairness. The subtle machinery of bias that once operated in the background now had friction. And that friction made room for change. She didn't micromanage. She didn't wield power with intimidation. She built bridges. She asked hard questions. She followed up. She remembered names. And most of all, she made space for the overlooked, the underestimated, the quietly brilliant people who had been sitting in corners for years, waiting for someone to believe they belonged. It wasn't long before other companies started paying attention. Industry panels began referencing Meridian's shift. Trade publications asked for interviews. Renee declined most. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was building legacy. One afternoon, as she walked past the main lobby on her way to lunch, she saw a young black woman sitting upright in one of the same stiff leather chairs she had once waited in. The woman looked nervous, portfolio clutched tight, knees crossed just so. She looked up as Renee passed. Their eyes met. And Renee stopped. "Interview," she asked gently. The young woman nodded. 10 o'clock. Still waiting. Renee checked her watch. It was 10:52. She turned to the receptionist. "Would you check who she's here to meet?" The receptionist, new, young, a little wide-eyed, nodded and picked up the phone. Within seconds, someone from HR came out to greet the woman, apologizing for the delay. Renee watched it unfold, then looked back at the woman. "You're going to do great," she said. The woman smiled, relief blooming across her face. "Thank you." As Renee walked away, she didn't smile for herself. She smiled for the ripple. For the promise. For the quiet revolution that started in a chair just like that one. And as long as she had a voice in the room, no one else was going to sit unseen for that long again. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in life are the quiet ones, the moments we wait, we endure, we sit with our dignity in rooms that fail to acknowledge us. Renee Caldwell's story is not just fiction. It reflects the very real, everyday experience of being overqualified and overlooked, of showing up fully prepared and still being treated as invisible. And yet, what matters is what we do next. The lesson here is not just about patience, but presence. It's about standing your ground when everything around you tries to shrink your worth. It's about understanding that silence does not mean acceptance and that being ignored does not mean you lack value. Sometimes the world won't see you until someone else of influence does. But that doesn't mean you weren't always brilliant, always capable, always worthy. To every reader who has ever been passed over, underestimated, or dismissed because of who you are or how you look, please remember, you don't need their permission to be excellent. Your preparation, your resilience, your ability to keep showing up is already a statement of power. And when the moment finally shifts, when the right eyes recognize what's always been there, be ready. Because your seat at the table isn't given. It's claimed. And if you're already at the table, never forget to look back. Make space. Speak up. Call out the brilliance in others who haven't been noticed yet. As Renee did, use your influence not to prove a point, but to build a pathway for those waiting silently, hoping someone like you will hold the door. From all of us at US Justice Story, thank you for spending time with this story. Thank you for listening. And most importantly, thank you for seeing. Because every time we share these moments, we remind someone else that they're not alone, and that justice, even in its quietest form, can be deeply transformative. Until next time.